Hello again, lot of me talking. I'm going to actually talk not about a particular object, but a particular issue that has confused some people that have sent me pictures of things, either not understanding what they're looking at or thinking that they've got the most immense rarity in the world, and I've gently had to disabuse them of that view. We're going to talk about particularly one mark, the leopard's head, that iconic mark for the London Assay Office. And as I've said on television, and lots of other people have said on television, the leopard's head, crowned or uncrowned, is the London town mark, and that is 100% true and 100% false. And I'm going to explain why that is. So the leopard's head mark, you won't see the early ones unless you're incredibly wealthy and own lots of diamond point spoons, but I'm going to assume you're not. Introduced in 1300, and basically for the first 400 years of the Assay Office, that is the mark that is struck on silver to guarantee it. You get the introduction of the lion passant in 1544. You get date letters in 1478, although they're not really date letters, but we shouldn't say that. We'll leave that for another day. But everything swims along happily until we hit the end of the 17th century. And the problem then was coin clipping, removing little slivers of silver off the edge of coins and melting them down to make objects. And also the preponderance of people with money to readily exchange coin for plate was proving a bit of a problem. There wasn't enough money in the country. So the genius idea was to say any wrought plate, any silver that's manufactured has to be of a higher standard, just to discourage the practice. So the Britannia standard is introduced by an Act of Parliament in 1696, but it's enacted in 1697. And all the punches at the London Assay Office change. You no longer see the leopard's head crowned. You no longer see the lion passant. You see a seated figure of Britannia and the leopard or lion's head erased, substituting those marks. That's fine. No problem there. But the Act of 1696 overlooked the assay of Britannia silver anywhere other than London. So effectively, overnight, it closed all of the provincial assay offices in England were not able to hallmark silver. So you get this sort of interregnum period where they're complaining furiously to the government, and possibly because it suited Goldsmiths Hall in London, they're not moving as quickly as they might. So it's a full 4 years before York, Chester, Newcastle, Exeter and Norwich, that are working assay offices at the time, are instructed that they can assay and hallmark Britannia silver. So that starts in 1701. Now, the instructions they're giving are important. They are told, because hallmarking at all these provincial centres prior to this was very erratic. Some places like Norwich and York had quite regular systems of assay with date letters. Chester had just introduced, within a period of 10 years, a formal system of assay. Exeter and Newcastle, they're a bit more haphazard. They have a town mark, but it's very rarely date letters or anything like that. There are some earlier ones, very early 16th century ones, but very rarely do they turn up. So it's all higgledy-piggledy, and this, in 1701, this formalises it. And they have to strike exactly the same marks as the London Assay Office. A seated figure of Britannia, a lion or leopard's head erased, a date letter, the maker's mark obviously. They also have to strike a separate town mark specific to their area to denote that it was assayed either at any of these centres, not in London. And this they did. And this carried on happily for 19 years, up until 1720, no problems at all, apart from the fact that in that period, sadly, both the Norwich and the York assay offices fell into disuse. So they're out of the picture. But in 1720, the sterling standard is restored. You can still make an Assay Britannia silver, but most people, 99.9% of people, decided no, they'll go back to working with sterling silver. This meant that all these provincial assay offices had to now mark sterling silver. And what were they going to do? Well, for the last 19 years, they'd been marking their Britannia silver just like London with a town mark. So now, from 1720 onwards, they mark their sterling silver just like London, but with their own town mark. But not always. And this is where the confusion sets in. So in 1720, or put it another way, in 1696, if you saw a piece of silver with a leopard's head crowned on it, it was assayed in London. Because of all the shenanigans that went on, in 1720, if you saw a piece of silver assayed with a leopard's head crowned, it could be made in London, assayed in London. It could also be assayed in Chester, in Newcastle, or in Exeter. And had they still been going, York and Norwich. And actually, when York starts up again at the end of the 18th century, they immediately adopt that. So you get that on York Silver 2, later York Silver 2. You don't see it, just for a point of clarity, on Sheffield or Birmingham Silver. They are the late assay offices. They are the new boys. They weren't around when any of this happened, so it doesn't apply to them. So you do not get the leopard's head crowned on Sheffield or Birmingham silver, but you do get it at all these other provincial assay offices alongside their own town mark, but not always. This continues for a number of years. Now I'm going to show you here, so I've gone on long enough without showing you something. There's a nice London spoon with a very nice, I'll put pictures up of these, a very nice clear, well it's not clear on the film, leopard's head crowned for London, 1783 that is. But here is a Exeter mug made in 1727, and that too has, and I'll put pictures of all these marks up, a very nice leopard's head crowned. Actually, I rather think the Exeter leopard's heads crowned were rather well cut and beautifully done, and actually a much more attractive mark than the London Assay Office. But for God's sake, don't tell them that. And here, because we're all mugs today, Newcastle 1769. Nice John Langland's, very nice John Langland's mug, very nice one. And again, lovely marks, leopard's head crowned, alongside a town mark, but leopard's head crowned. And this is the treat, really, because this is Chester. This is a Chester skewer. Now you'll notice it's got a leopard's head crowned here, but there is no Chester Assay Office mark. And because of that, this skewer was actually sold to me by a company of silver dealers that have been going for over 100 years in the centre of London, are on their 4th or 5th generation, as a London skewer. So mistakes happen, happily. I don't have a piece of York to show you at the moment, but I'll get a picture of a mark, and that will show you a leopard's head crowned. Now, what's important to remember, there are differences, and I think this is where all the confusion comes from. These assay offices continue to use the leopard's head crowned. Newcastle and York use that punch right up to the end of the assay office. In the case of Newcastle, it's 1883. In the case of York, it's around about 1863. Exeter is different, and Chester, but Exeter in particular, when in 1784 the duty mark is introduced, they bin the leopard's head crown straight away. It goes in the bin. It's considered superfluous. So after 1784, when the duty mark is introduced, you will not see a leopard's head on a piece of Exeter silver. And because most of the Exeter silver you will see is of that later period. That's why people become unfamiliar with it being struck on earlier plate and have sort of confusions about it. Similarly, Chester, when there was a sort of regime change of assay master and wardens in the late 1830s, they basically binned it too. When the new date letter cycle started in 1839, the leopard's head is omitted from that point on, right up until its closure in 1962. So again, most of the Chester silver you will see is predominantly from that later period. So when you see a piece of Chester silver with a leopard's head, it can confuse you. And so this is what's been happening. And I just wanted to clarify it. But if you're thinking that's all very confusing, well, it is. Well, it is, but it also holds true that the leopard's head crowned or uncrowned is the London town mark now, but it wasn't always. It could be found in lots of various places. This gives you a lot of opportunity as well. At York, a town mark, the York town mark, because it is so big, is rarely struck on pieces of silver. So more York silver has been confused as far less valuable and more commonplace London silver than you can possibly imagine. Tons of it sold as London, not by unwitting little old ladies in their cottage, but by major London auctioneers in their catalogues, if you would believe it. And you must, because I know it's true. So there's a little look. I'll put pictures of all those different leopard's heads from all those different areas. And it's one of these things that once someone like me has told you, it will seem very, very obvious. But don't be disheartened if you have made that mistake, because there are bigger and better people than you that have made that mistake in the past, believe me. So go out armed with the knowledge and have a look, and hopefully, I was so pleased to get this. I mean, it was very expensive, but it was only very expensive because they were very expensive dealers. It wasn't as expensive as it should have been as Chester. So it's there. Take advantage of it. Go out. Go and have a look. Go out this weekend. So good antiques hunting and goodbye. And next week, hopefully, I will have discovered one interesting, wonderful object, and I'll get back on form and talk to you about that instead. But we've had to do a troubled leopard this week. And as I say, if you've made the mistake, don't feel bad. We all make mistakes in this business. If we didn't, we wouldn't be human. Ta-ta.